I think we are ready to get started. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. My name is Willie Denish. I am the co-director of the Jazz Art Writers South Festival. We call ourselves Jaws Fest. Jazz Art Writers South is very, very pleased to present the celebration of jazz, local artists, authors, and being here at South Alabama to celebrate our Southern culture. So all together we call it Jaws Fest. Our theme for 2024 has been a celebration of jazz, celebrating the future of jazz. So we want to make sure to thank all of our event partners. We definitely want to be sure to thank the USA Library Art Galleries and Lorraine. Thank you so much, Lorraine, for providing us the space. The space is provided to us here for free, so we're very, very grateful for that and for their participation. In the back of the room, you will find a sign-up sheet and refreshments, which you are welcome to take part of at any point in time. Please feel free to eat them and enjoy them, because I'm not going to take them home. So y'all take them with you, all right? Just a few things to know about. We want to make sure you get all the homework done up front and let you know about the things that are going on. So this celebration in the art gallery, we have 3 floors worth of gallery space. So we have the first floor, gallery hall. We have a poetry and spoken word exhibit on the second floor. That's on the first floor, second floor, and then on the third floor we have our Jaws Youth exhibit. And the Jaws Youth exhibit this year has 219 pieces created by people that are under the age of 18. So that's something we're very, very pleased to know about. So as you leave here tonight, up until 9:00 p.m., you're welcome to go and see the other galleries in the collection. Please feel free to participate with that. So we're very, very pleased about our Jaws Youth. We do want to give them a round of applause for excellent. The second thing I want to do is be sure to thank our Universal Pass holders for being generous sponsors of our festival this year. You've come to every concert, you've come to every event, and we thank you so much for supporting us up front. Our mission tonight is by donation, and so I would like to thank everyone here in the gallery and our audience tonight for their kind donations. We appreciate your support of the Jaws Festival. These donations, again, are providing generous support of many different causes here in the city. So we're very, very appreciative of all of your support. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. A few things we want to make sure that we do before we let Thomas come on to the stage. So we want to make sure to let you know about our upcoming events. And so in the next few weeks, the festival will conclude. We have a few more pretty big events that are coming, so we want to make sure to share those with you. So next Wednesday will be our last Jazzy Lunch of the season of the festival. If you have missed Jazzy Lunch, we very much encourage you to come and join next week. We've been featuring a jazz performer called The Sound Barrier, and he is awesome, y'all. He is very, very amazing. But he's going to have some friends join him called the Dolphin Street Stompers, and they're going to play Dixieland music. That is for free in this building next Wednesday at noon till 1 o'clock in room 181. You're welcome to come and join us. It's going to be a great, great time. After that, we'll have the Jazz Stories and Poetry event on Tuesday, June 18th. In room 181 at 6 p.m. And we also might also be in this space as well. That's an opportunity to experience the combination, the relationship between jazz and poetry. And we are very, very pleased to celebrate. And just come out and enjoy the spoken word and see a different aspect of how jazz can be influential in our world and in our community. And our closing ceremony, we're looking forward to this one. We're really looking forward to it. Is Andrew Ayers and Friends. And that's going to be June 20th at Laidlaw Performing Arts Hall. And that's it's a couple of Thursdays away, so you can still get tickets for that. That is admission by donation. It will be at Laidlaw Performing Arts Center, so please be sure that you get your tickets early, because we have a lot of space in that venue. We want to make sure everyone gets the right accommodations for that space. So the closing ceremony with Andrew Ayers and Friends on June 20th at 6 p.m. Please come out and enjoy that. We are looking forward to seeing everyone there. So with that, I think that is all of our homework. And so I want to make sure I'm going to step away from the mic. So I want to make sure to thank our very patient friend, Thomas Jackson, who has been a part of the festival since its inception, since our first year. And we have some of his artwork that's in our collection, our permanent collection for the Jaws Festival. And Thomas has come to South Alabama before as an exhibitor, and at that point in time we were hoping to have a concert with him, and that didn't materialize because of the pandemic. But now we are so very, very pleased to have him rejoin us a special event, a one-of-a-kind concert. A friend of the festival, our friend, musician, and visual artist, Thomas Jackson. Let's welcome him.
All right, I'm going to, oh man, this works. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit between here and there, talking about blues and jazz a little bit, which is what I do for a living. I play music for a living, and I draw pictures. That's a very simple way to say it. And so, how many of you in here are blues fans, like hardcore blues fans? Okay, I'm nervous now because you probably actually know this stuff, and I can't just make it up, right? So I fell into the blues a way a lot of people my age probably did. I sort of fell into listening to classic rock. I was born in 1973. I came up in the 80s. In the era of hair metal, and I had hair back then. And I somehow gravitated towards what at the time would have been called classic rock because it was stuff that came out in the 60s and 70s, you know, to put us in a time frame. Now classic rock is like Nirvana and Hoobastank or what, you know, something from 10 years ago. But I fell into listening to Led Zeppelin and Cream and the Beatles and the Who and a lot of music that came from England. And I thought England was this very exotic, faraway place because I'm from Plantersville, Mississippi, which is not a very exotic, faraway place if you're from Plantersville. And so I was very attracted to this music that came from far away, and I got into listening to it and reading about it and researching it. Because as a kid, much like my son here, I was the type of kid that got into like weird, obscure stuff and sort of obsessed over it, right? And so I started to, and this was sort of pre-internet even, so this was a while back, you know. I started to read about these classic rock bands, you know, and Eric Clapton and all these guys. And they kept mentioning these musicians that I had never heard of. A guy named Robert Johnson, which that sounded like a guy that works in an office building somewhere, you know, not a very, you know, kind of rock star kind of name. Charlie Patton, you know, so I'm like, who are these people? And then I find out that these people were from Mississippi. And we're in Alabama, so you can probably relate to this. Growing up in Mississippi in the 80s, you didn't really see much about Mississippi on television. You know what I mean? Like when the newscast, when the weatherman did the weather, he didn't tell you what was going on in Plantersville, Mississippi. I just kept waiting for that to happen. And so whenever I saw a reference to Mississippi in popular culture, it was kind of like, well, wow. Like, you know, it amazed me that Eric Clapton had even heard of Mississippi. You know what I mean? And so right about the time this started to happen, magically, they put out this Robert Johnson CD box set. If any of you are old enough to remember this, back in the ancient times when people had cassettes and CDs, they sold these extravagantly priced box sets. You remember that? And they'd come in this big old fancy box. And so my friend got the Robert Johnson box set, right? And it said on the front of it, this is where it all came from. This is the king of the Delta blues. This is like the Holy Grail. And here's this guy on the front of this box holding this guitar, and he looks real dapper and cool. So I borrow this collection, and I can still remember this, and I take it home, and I open the box, and there's this book in there with all these pictures and all this description of all this history of this guy. And I put the cassette in my little Walkman tape player, and I go sit outside, and we had a little swing outside in Mississippi, and I'm sitting there, and I put it on, and I hear, you know, because I'd never heard a recording from the 1930s. You know, it was scratchy, and I couldn't really understand what he was saying, and it was like an acoustic guitar. And to be honest, it didn't really strike me. You know what I mean? It didn't change my life at the moment. I wish it had. I've heard a lot of stories about people hearing Robert Johnson for the first time and they went out and got a guitar and, you know, and all that. And I just remember thinking, what is the big deal about this guy? You know, like you can barely hear what he's saying. All the songs sounded the same to me, you know. But then I would read these interviews with Eric Clapton and all these people that I looked up to and admired, and they would be like, this guy's, you know, the greatest thing in the world. So I kept listening to it. You know, I kept thinking there's got to be something in there that I'm missing. And I would ride around. I went to college a few years later, and I'd ride around in a little pickup truck with that little cassette tape in there. And I kept on listening to it. You know what I mean? And I just didn't get it. And so I started to read about him a little bit and started to read about these other people that played blues back then. And slowly over time, I kind of started to get it. And you can ask my wife, I kind of got obsessed with it, you know, like anything else. And what I learned is this music that was recorded almost 100 years ago, just on a guitar with a guy singing, no fancy overdubs, no fancy anything. It's like fine wine. It's sort of like an acquired taste that you have to develop over time a lot of times. A lot of people aren't going to listen to it for the first time and go, wow, this is amazing. You know what I mean? And so for those of you who haven't listened to these guys, the 2 or 3 in here that are maybe checking out some of this for the first time, you got to listen to it several times for it to start to pick up. And I say Robert Johnson because you probably all heard of, most of you have heard of Robert Johnson, who's from Mississippi, and he was a blues guy. But there were a number of artists who recorded blues back in the 20s and 30s who were really the forefront of how all this stuff began. And so I got obsessed with all this stuff, and I started playing music like a lot of kids in the 90s. I decided that I wanted to be a rock and roll star. And so I got a guitar and I started to write songs, and I started to go out and play in coffee shops and places like that where they didn't pay me, but they would like let me play there and they wouldn't run me off, you know. So I started to do that. And over time, I neglected my studies in college and started to play more and more gigs. And then they started to pay me. And I was like, okay, well, this is the way to go, right? And so I did that for a number of years. I was a single guitar man, you know, went out and played acoustic gigs. And you've probably seen a lot of people in restaurants around here playing these solo acoustic gigs. And they're like 3 hours long, you know, which is a long time to play songs. And you have to memorize a lot. You have to learn a lot of songs. You have to write a lot of songs. And so I started playing a lot of blues songs because they have a lot of the same patterns to them. You know, if you can play blues in the key of G, you can play a lot of different blues songs in the key of G. So I kind of started to do it out of laziness in a way, because it's like, well, I can rattle off 2 or 3 of these blues songs that have 3 chords to them, and I don't have to memorize a bunch of songs that have like a dozen chords to them. You know, I was a lazy person. And over time, as I got more interested in it, I started to study it more and say, you know, this isn't good enough. I got to really learn how to play this stuff. And so for years now, I've been reading about these guys and studying about them. And when I got married 10 years ago, this month, and I decided, well, I'm going to have some more income than what I was doing. My wife's like nodding her head, because I was a musician and you know, living by myself playing music, it was fine. I was making enough to do my thing, and then I got married and had a kid and had to start making more money. So I started to sell my artwork, which I did on the side, and that became sort of a lucrative thing for me. And at first I was kind of scared to paint blues people, because guitars are really hard to draw. And I told you I'm a lazy person, so I neglected it for a while, but then I kind of fell into it, and it became something that I could sort of tie in with my music. And so I'm going to go through some slides and talk about a few of these people, and I'm going to play you some songs. I'm going to play you a few of their songs, and I'm going to play you a few of my songs. Oh yeah, now I can walk around. Wow, I'm like singing dance now. So, this is Sam Chapman, 70s, the 1970s, and he was born in the 1920s, so he really lived a really long time. I don't know that he did very many commercial recordings, but he made Library of Congress recordings. And he was supposedly the stepbrother of Charlie Patton, and I'm going to get to Charlie Patton here in a minute. He's a big deal. This is Robert Johnson, the guy I was talking about earlier. This is based on one of 3 different known photos of this guy. One photo, the most recently found photo, was just released to the public probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So this is a sort of archaeology that we're still finding out a lot of information about, you know. I drew this on my iPad in a program called Procreate. So I really took the actual photograph and kind of traced it out and then just played around with doing different colors. This was probably like the first blues style painting I did, or drawing, and I don't know that, I don't think this is supposed to be anybody in particular, it's just a blues guy. This is Robert Johnson, who we talked about earlier. A lot of these guys in the 20s and 30s who recorded were sort of like what I do in a way. You know, they weren't famous people. They went around and just played wherever they could get a gig. They would play house parties. A lot of people on plantations and things back in the 30s would have house parties, kind of like you do in big cities, where they would raise, it would be a rent party, you would call it. And so you would charge like a nickel or something to get in, and they would fry chicken and have moonshine and different stuff. And they would say, well, get us somebody to play guitar. Now, I'm kind of rambling with this a little bit, but part of what fascinates me about all this is this was just as electricity was kind of coming into play, right? So most of these places were not going to have electricity, and most people didn't have a radio or have a record player. So imagine you work in the cotton field from can to can all day, you know, from dusk to dawn, all day, 6 days a week, and then on Saturday night, you go to one of these parties and you see somebody playing music. Now, you probably haven't heard music all week. You might have heard somebody singing, you know, while you're picking cotton. If you went to town, you might have gone to the commissary or gone to town and heard a record over a record player. But other than that, you probably never hear music, except on Saturday night when you get like one of the greatest guitar players that ever lived playing for you on Saturday night. So these guys would play these rent parties. They would play juke joints, which were a little different than a rent party because it wasn't somebody's house. It was actual like business establishment. And some of these guys actually made pretty good money doing this for the time, especially to be African American in the 20s and 30s. There weren't a whole lot of ways that you could make good money. And some of these guys, like Robert Johnson, for example, could pull in what a lot of people would make in like a week in one night. You know, I mean, a lot of them would drink it up or spend it or get it stolen or whatever. You know, they might not be able to hold on to it for a long time, but they would make pretty good money, and they would dress pretty nice, as I'm going to show you later, you know, in some of these other slides. One thing I've kind of tried to move away from in painting this stuff and playing it is this idea that blues has to be this like scruffy, down home, dirty, nasty thing. Like people that play blues have like beat up shoes and, you know, old overalls, and they're sitting on a porch or whatever. And that's not really how it was. A lot of these guys dressed really nice. You know, they wanted to show their success at what they were doing. And a very old gentleman told me one time that back in the 20s and 30s, if you were African American and you were walking down the street or somewhere and you were wearing a suit, they would assume that you were a preacher and they would leave you alone. So you wouldn't get a vagrancy charge or something like that. So a lot of these guys would dress like that because of that. This is me in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where I live and do my art, music, and everything. This is my son, James, down here in the corner. He's grown up a little bit since then. But I painted a signal box in Hattiesburg. The mayor allotted some money for a lot of artists to paint some signal boxes. And this was a signal box in front of T-Bone Records, which is a local record store. And this is a painting I did of the Graves brothers, which were from, I believe, Meridian or Laurel, Mississippi. Blind Roosevelt Graves, his brother Leroy Graves. I think Blind Roosevelt Graves was blind and Leroy was partially blind. And Blind Roosevelt Graves would play guitar and sing, and his brother would back him up. Well, this is Blind, because he's got the guitar, and that's his brother up there, I'm sorry. So his brother Leroy would play tambourine or like tap his foot or play kazoo or something. And they played in and around downtown Hattiesburg and Laurel and Meridian. And in 1936, in the old Hattiesburg Hotel, which was in downtown Hattiesburg, which was torn down years ago, they did a recording session for the American Recording Company, and they had a guy named Cooney Vaughn, who was a local piano player there in Hattiesburg, accompany them, and they did a set of recordings that are now regarded to be the first rock and roll recordings, because they have a ding, 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 ding kind of thing going on. And so Hattiesburg, Mississippi is sort of famous in some circles as being called the birthplace of rock and roll because the Graves brothers made their famous recording in Hattiesburg. Most of these guys, that's how they did their recording. There were a few like actual recording studios in the 20s and 30s, but a lot of these recordings were done in hotels. And what they would do is they would rent a couple of hotel rooms, and they put all the equipment in one room, the recording equipment, which back then was like big equipment. And then they put the musicians in the other room, and they would record them, and they would have a bunch of people show up at one time. So they would put an ad in the newspaper. That's what they did in Hattiesburg. And they said, we're going to do a talent recording search, for the American Recording Corporation here in Hattiesburg at the hotel. And people would just show up with their instruments, and they'd be lined up outside the door, and they'd have them come in and audition, or maybe they would, contact them ahead of time, and they would come in and do their recording. And so the Graves brothers would come in and sit down, and they had a little light, a red light, green light, and they said when the light comes on, you start recording. And then there was a warning light that would come on that would say you have like 45 seconds or something before it's over. Because all this was being recorded onto a disc, right? And the reason why pop songs on the radio now are like 2 or 3 minutes long is because those discs were 2 or 3 minutes long back then. And so everything had to be, you couldn't have a 5 or 6 or 7 minute long song. You couldn't have Bohemian Rhapsody or whatever, And I guess if it was a classical piece, you'd have to flip the record over to the side too to hear the other part of it. But these guys would go in and sit down. A lot of times they had never seen a microphone, never recorded before. And they would start playing, and they would watch for that signal to come on. And when it came on, they would kind of wrap up their song. And you start to see over a little bit of time, the first kind of recordings like this that were done in the 20s and 30s with kind of rural musicians like this, you can hear on a lot of the recordings when it starts to get towards the end, they just wrap it up all of a sudden. But then when you get to Robert Johnson, everything was timed out to be exactly the length of the record. And so he had his song, he would practice them to where they were the right, length to fit exactly that thing. So whereas in the beginning you had a lot of guys that were, I guess, sort of new to the whole recording thing, over time, they started to figure it out, you know, and think of it more as an art form and get better with it. This is a guy named Vasti Jackson, who's a world-renowned blues guy, who's from Hattiesburg. He's actually from Macomb, I think, but he lives in Hattiesburg. He's a friend of mine, so I had to paint a picture of him and put him on there. He's actually, I think, in Spain right now playing, so he gets around a pretty good bit. I can't remember who this is. I'm trying to remember who this is. You know who this is, right? This is Louis Armstrong. He was one of the original blues guys. A lot of people don't think of him as a blues guy. They think of him more as a jazz guy. But if you look at his original recordings, they're all, you know, St. Louis blues or whatever blues. It all kind of came from New Orleans and kind of came from the same place. This is Papa Charlie Jackson, who was a banjo player. It's my son again. This is a more modern lady whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. Something in the Dap Kings or something. This is Mississippi John Hurt. This is one of the earlier ones I did. He's a Mississippi blues guy who recorded in the late 1920s, and his records didn't really do anything. And so he just went back to farming, and then in the 1960s he was rediscovered. As people started to collect blues records, they started looking at the names on these records, and some of these guys they just found in the phone book. But he was one of the sort of rediscovered blues guys. And so when he was in his probably early 70s, or maybe even older than that, he started touring around the world playing blues, which is kind of cool. This is Elmore James, as you can see by the EJ. This is Arl Burnside, who's a more contemporary Mississippi blues guy, who I actually got to see in concert. He passed away probably about 20 years ago. But in the blues world, that's contemporary, you know. This is Charlie Patton recording at Paramount Records, one of the few like actual recording studios where blues guys recorded. Charlie Patton made his first records in 1929, so he was one of the sort of original Mississippi blues guys that was recorded. And he's one of my favorite musicians and characters out of all this. He was of a mixed heritage. He's like part African American, part white, part Native American. And I'll show you a picture of him later. It's very interesting. Here's another painting I did of him. He made his first recording in 1929, but he had been playing professionally around the Delta for like 20 years previous to that. So he was sort of one of the first people that played blues in a rural setting that recorded, even though in New Orleans, Lonnie Johnson recorded stuff in like 1924. So I wouldn't say Charlie Patton was like the first blues guy, but he was certainly one of the earliest and one of the people who, when blues really started to first be recorded and released in the 20s, it was like a craze like anything else. You know, it was sort of like grunge music in the 90s. You know, I remember being a kid in the 90s, and it was like if you had a flannel shirt and a guitar, you could get a record deal because that's what they were looking for at the time. And so Charlie Patton was one of the people who took the sort of rural music that he was playing, which we don't really know what it sounded like, and adapt that to more modern blues, okay? So I'm going to hush up for a minute and play you a little bit of music by Charlie Patton. I'm making this up as I go, so bear with me.
Get done.
So the recording guys would seek these guys out, right? Because blues was a new craze. But Charlie Patton was already making a good living playing blues a long time before he recorded. They say he dressed real nice. He had several guitars. He had a person that drove him around. And he actually contacted the record label and said, hey, I'm Charlie Patton. I want to make some records. And so they were like, okay. So he started out with this. This was his biggest hit. This is called Pony Blues. Hitch up my pony, saddle up my black mare. Hitch up my pony, saddle up my black mare. I wanna find my rider, she's running round this world somewhere. I've got a brand new Shetland and I got a whole red train. Got a brand new Shetland and I've got a whole red train. I'm gonna hop up in the saddle, mama, tied up on the rein. I wanna tell you something, mama, honey, if I ever get the chance. I wanna tell you something, mama, if I ever get the chance. I don't wanna get married, mama, I just wanna be your man. Hitch up my pony and saddle up my great mare. Hitch up my pony and saddle up my black mare. I'm gonna find my rider, she's running around this world somewhere. All right. In Mississippi, in Clarksville, there's a place called the Shack Up Inn. I don't know if everybody's been to that place. You go up there and you rent you a little shack. You can stay there for the night. And they got real good food. They have music. Now, they don't pay the musicians a whole lot of money, but they let them stay in one of those shacks for free, which is pretty cool. Especially if you're like on your way somewhere, you can go play there, stay there at night, and head out to the next place. So I stayed there one night, played my gig. And I wrote this song about it, hoping, you know, if I write a song about the Shack Up Inn, they'll let me keep playing it. One thing you notice, I was talking to somebody about this a minute ago. You know, Mississippi blues is like the tourist thing, and people don't really pay that much attention to it if they're local. You know what I mean? Kind of like I'm from Tupelo, where Elvis is from, and people in Tupelo could care less, but people from out of town are like, oh wow, Elvis leaned up against this wall, you know. And you can always tell in the Delta, the people like that are looking at y'all, like you're looking at me now, they're like paying attention. They're from like Sweden or something, you know. And the people that are up just walking around are like the locals. And I had these folks sitting there, and they were looking at me just like I'm looking at you. And I was talking, telling a story, and they were just listening just as intently as they could. And I played my songs, and I really thought I was doing good. At the end of the night, I went up and talked to them. They couldn't speak a word of English. They didn't understand what I was saying, which was probably for the best. But anyway, so here we go. This is called the Shack Up Inn. Gotta tighten this thing up. At the Shack Up Inn, Clarksdale, Mississippi, I eat for free and the tourists always tip me when I play a Charlie Patton song. All the Europeans, they all sing along, eating catfish and drinking beer. I play my guitar behind my ears, and all those Japanese women cheer. When my gig is done, honey, I'm right on track. I got a 6-pack of beer and I got the keys to my shack. So I go on in and I kick my feet on that. Then I work on a song or two, and then when my work is through, baby, I go to sleep and dream about you. Sometimes I find I'm about to lose my mind when I think about all those old Delta days. Late at night at the Shack Up Inn, honey, all I can hear is the whisper of the wind, and I think about way back when. Back when Robert Johnson used to walk the earth, he was playing blues and chasing skirts so he wouldn't have to go to work. Morning comes and it's time to go. It's time to pack my bags and hit the road. It's on to the very next show. I say farewell to the Shack Up Inn, send in my keys and get my tires to spin, 'cause I'm on running down the road again. Sometimes I find, you know, I'm about to lose my mind when I think about all those old Mississippi Delta days. Sometimes I find, you know, I'm about to lose my mind when I think about all those old Mississippi Delta days. Alright, so I played you a Charlie Patton song. Here's another Charlie Patton I painted on an old record. This is an actual photo of Charlie Patton that's been digitally colorized and kind of cleaned up. And it's still not real clean looking because that's the best they got to work with, you know, but that's the only known photograph of him. There's another paint with Charlie Patton. You can tell I like Charlie Patton. Here's Charlie Patton playing in a juke joint. This is Blind Roosevelt Graves. This is the guy I told you about earlier. This is Skip James. This is a very early photo of Skip James. This is another cool photo of Skip James, another Mississippi Blues guy. This is the full-length picture of Charlie Patton that was taken in 1929, I believe. He's a cool-looking dude. This is Son House, who was another blues guy that was rediscovered in the 60s, and he made a lot of records at that point when he was a very old man and had done a lot of living. And this is him when he was very young and vibrant, as you can see. Looks a lot different than you think of, like what I was saying, getting back to the idea of like the old guy sitting in the chair going, I love the blues, you know, like Chappelle Show, that kind of thing. This, you know, you gotta think this was like a new kind of music back then. These were young guys doing it. I mean, these guys were in their early 20s, some, you know, Charlie Patton was the oldest of all of them, and I think he died when he was about maybe 40 years old or in his late 30s. But Son House was probably like 25 years old or something when he took that picture. Shot a man, went to Parchment for a while, and got out, started making records. Here's a really cool colorized picture of Robert Johnson, who supposedly sold his soul to the devil. I think he just practiced real hard. But I'm going to play a cool song of his called Phonograph Blues. Okay, this is back when the phonograph was a new cool thing. A lot of early blues songs were very racy, and like they had kind of double entendre, you know, like cook my wiener and put my hot dog in your hot dog bun, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And of course, with music now, there's a lot of boasting about your, you know, ability to romantically kiss people. You know, you got kids. But Robert Johnson wrote a song that was kind of different from that, where he sings about not being able to do that very well.
She can't hear you. They got to speak up. She can't hear you.
Beatrice, she's got a phonograph.
He speaks too low.
It won't sing a lonesome word. Beatrice, she's got a phonograph and it won't sing a lonesome word. What evil have I done? What evil has that poor girl heard? Beatrice, I love my phonograph, but I broke my winding chain. Broke my phonograph, broke my winding chain. Now you've taken all my loving, given it to another man. Now we played it on the sofa, played it upside the wall. My needles got rusty and they don't want to play nothing at all. We played it on the sofa and we played it upside the wall. Now my needles got rusty, they don't want to play nothing at all. Beatrice, I go crazy. I'm about to lose my mind. I go crazy. I'm about to lose my mind. Bring your clothes on back home. Try my loving just one more time.
world famous guy now. I mean, people come from all over the world and come to Greenwood, Mississippi to see his grave and to just be in the same place that this guy was in. My wife and my son and I went to Dallas, or went to, where did we go? Not Dallas. San Antonio. See, I'm nervous. So I get stuff confused. But we went to San Antonio back in November, this past November, to visit some relatives. And November, it was the same date that Robert Johnson had recorded there back in 1936, I believe. And the hotel that he recorded in is still there. And we went and found it, and we went up to the floors on the 4th floor, and there was a lady cleaning rooms, and she said, "You want to go in there?" And we went in there, and I was shaking and nervous and everything. But that's where he recorded, and he never became famous in his lifetime. He was mentioned in I think like Billboard magazine or something, had like a little paragraph that said, this rising star from Greenwood is number 54 on the blues charts or whatever, something like that. And that was pretty much it. But a guy named Albert Hammond, who was a very wealthy New York City guy, his family had a lot of money. His grandson was in a band called the Strokes. You ever heard of the Strokes? They were like a band from the 2000s or whatever. Anyway, he was a blues enthusiast and somehow found one of Robert Johnson's records that was out at the time and started listening to it. And he contacted Columbia Records and got some more of their masters and stuff of him and started listening to it and became enthralled with Robert Johnson. And so he was putting together this concert in 1937, this is 36 or 37, in New York called Spirituals to Swing. And it was good, because swing music at the time, like, you know, Benny Goodman and Count Basie and all this stuff was real popular. And they were trying to show how it developed from like folk music to blues music to jazz or whatever. And so they were going to have all these different musicians at Carnegie Hall that were going to play different kinds of music, and they wanted to get Robert Johnson to perform blues and be the solo blues guy. So they sent people out looking for him, and he died like a week before that concert. And so I kind of get teared up thinking about that, but like this would have made him a big star, you know. And so they got a guy named Big Bill Broomsey, who was an established Chicago blues man, who dressed very sharply. He was like a star in the blues world. He wore really nice hats, really nice suits, made good money, and had recorded a lot of records up into this point in time. And so John Hammond contacted him to be Robert Johnson's replacement in the concert. But instead of coming out wearing a suit, they had him coming out wearing overalls and straw hats because they wanted him to look primitive and rural. So anyway, that was a weird time in history. So, did we get to the end of it? All right, so back to this Charlie Patton guy. I'm going to play another Charlie Patton song called Down the Dirt Road Blues. He recorded this in his first recording session in 1929, along with Pony Blues, which is the other song I just played. Can't go down this old dirt road all by myself. Can't go down this old dirt road all by myself. Can't take you with me, I'll carry me somebody else. All right. How we doing on the time here? We in good shape? All right, I'm gonna play you a song. Hush up and play a song. This is a blues song I wrote using the blues form about a place. I can tell you all this because we're not in Mississippi, but it was in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And I played at this place a few times, and every time I would play there, there was hardly anybody there, which is my fault. I mean, you know, not famous or anything, but the owner would always say, "Man, you should have been here last night. We had a big crowd, there were so many people here, and the band that played, I mean, you just should have seen them." And then there's another place I played that was like that, and they had pictures on the wall, like photographs of all this stuff. And I remember there was like a photograph of like 5 or 6 beautiful sorority girls. This was years ago, you know. And I was like, well, when were they here? Oh, that was the other night. You should have been here. There was a bikini part, you know, it was just like, it was always like, you should have been here last night. So I wrote a song about it. I want to hear it, here it goes. I got to the bar around 7. I was supposed to play from 8 till 11. I pushed the salad bar out of the way. I got out my guitar and I started to play. But you could hear all the crickets chirping, 'cause none of my songs were working. My tip jar was bare and dry. I felt so lonesome I could cry. Finally took a break around 10. Sat at the bar and ordered a gin. Bartender looked my way. This is what he had to say: "You should have been here last night." Oh man, it really was a sight. The band really was cooking. The singer was so good looking. There was a line out the door, and there were girls passed out all over the floor. It was a beautiful sight. You should have been here last night. I'm gonna build myself a time machine and set yesterday as my course. 'Cause all day long I've been a day late and I've been a dollar short. At 11 my shift was done, so I took my money and run right on over to my honey's house. She was watching Golden Girls on the couch. You know, I tried to make my move, and she said, "Honey, I ain't in the mood." You know, she just shook her head. You can guess what she said: "You should have been here last night." Oh baby, it really was a sight. I was buck naked and ready. I even cooked spaghetti. I was ready to go, but you never came home from your show. Now your timing ain't right. Should have been here last night. Wrote another song while I was at the shack up in. At the time, my son, I think, was about 2 years old. He's 8 years old now. song about him. I'm going to play for you. Little boogie, you know that I think about you. I wonder what you're gonna do, what kind of world you're gonna move through, what you're gonna have to prove. Little boogie, what kind of life will you lead? Will you sail around the world and fly to the moon and romance some girl in Spain? Will you live to see 2183? Will you sail among the stars? Will you make friends at school and start a club and break a few rules? Play with little plastic cards? Little boogie, hope you don't have to work like my daddy did, like my brother did or my mother does. Take all that time to learn how to laugh and love. Will you live to see 2183? You sail among the stars. Make friends at school and start a club and break a few rules. Play with little plastic cards. All right, now this is my big hit song. This is the one I get requested for the most from like the 3 or 4 people that requested. I went up to New York years ago on a little tour with a buddy of mine, and it was my first time I'd been to New York, and I thought, well, I better write a song while I'm up here, so when I come back I can say I wrote this song in New York, and it will sound, worldly. So here we go. Was eating 3-eyed fish in a bar in New York, with no movie star on life support, looking at a map and trying not to get off course. Asked my friend what direction to take, and he said, stick to the left, before it's too late. You're in purgatory and you're just gonna have to wait. I knew then, but I wasn't sure. If I lost the battle or won the war. There was energy, blood on my shoes, me and people with nothing to lose. New York City with the blues. I knew then, but I wasn't sure. I lost the battle. sister-in-law, and I went back to Mississippi just to sharpen my claws. I knew then, but I wasn't sure. I lost the battle and won the war. I knew then, but I wasn't sure. I lost the battle and won the war. All right, I'm tuning to open G, which means I'm tuning it to a G chord. And in the blues world, they used to refer to that as Spanish tuning. And they believe that the reason why they call it that is because I'm trying to be cool and tune and talk at the same time. Back in the early part of the 20th century, I believe, the late 1800s, parlor guitars became very popular. A parlor guitar is like a small-bodied acoustic guitar that they used to sit and play in their parlors, right? And so you see a lot of photos of these old blues guys and they're playing parlor guitars. They were really popular, and so all these women would buy these mail-order parlor guitars, and they would come with a little instructional booklet that would have a couple of songs in it. And there was a song that was in open G tuning that was called like Spanish Fandango or something like that. And so they sort of theorized that the name Spanish tuning came from that. Now whether that's true or not, who knows? But you know, that's the story behind that. And the trick is to be able to do it and talk at the same time. So anyway, Charlie Patton had a song in Spanish tuning called Banny Rooster. And so there was this old superstition that if your significant other was out doing things that they weren't supposed to do, and they were coming home at the early hours of the morning, that the rooster would crow and you'd catch him. So you could get you a rooster and see if something's going on. You know, it's kind of like tracking you on the phone. I'm gonna buy me a banny, put 'em out in my backyard. I'm gonna buy me a banny, put 'em out in my backyard. When a stranger comes, you'll hear him clap his wings and holler. What do you need with a rooster that won't crow today? What do you need with a rooster that won't crow today? What do you need with a man when he won't do nothing you say? What do you need with a hen that won't cackle, baby, when she lays? What do you need with a hen that won't cackle, baby, when she lays?
my team and let some other team members come up. We're going to do some very nice things for some people coming in with us tonight, no problem. And I want to make sure that you know, if you're interested in buying one of our Snazzy Joss Fest t-shirts with our alien on the front and the full schedule on the back. We invite you to buy those directly from our website, jossfestival.com. It is a donation to the festival, and they will drop ship that directly to your home. So you don't have to wait for us to give it to you. You can definitely have that at your house. So we appreciate your support in any kind of way to our festival. Because again, we have many, many causes that we are celebrating and we are supporting with this festival. So we're very, very appreciative. So if you see myself or any of our team members with these t-shirts on, if you have questions, of course, this is Paula Webb, my co-director for the festival. If you have any questions at all, thank you, Paula. If you have any questions at all, just feel free to stop us. And again, please remember we have 3 more galleries of art outside of this event, so we're happy to have you explore those, and of course our upcoming events on our schedule. So let's do some fun stuff. Let's give some stuff away. How about that? All right? Don't get some stuff. Yeah, Shirley, you should.
You have to be here.
Michaela Scarborough.
She's in the restaurant.
Let's give her. Lucas, I think this is Annapolis. Lucas, all right. This is why we have for you to sign in when you come in. And of course, we do have feedback forms in the back, everyone, so we appreciate your feedback about how you enjoyed tonight. Helps us plan for events for the future. Let us know what works, what doesn't work, and how we can do things better. Thank you so much. Here we go. Sonia Caffey. Sonia, all right.
You got one more.
She won it.
And as we're leaving tonight, you can feel free to take photos and selfies with our alien mascot. I'm not sure if we have a name in it, so we might name it next year. But feel free to take selfies with him and pictures with us. Thank you for your coming tonight. This is our last one for Alvin Williams. Alvin Williams, all right. Let's give everybody a round of applause. All right.
Thank you so much. Please do the survey. That helps us so very much. Also, we have extra cookies, and we have extra brownies, and we have tea. So please be sure to grab something before you leave. Get back to the
Please wipe us out.
Yeah.
It needs a little.
Don't leave yet. We still got 2 more songs.
You gotta go out one.
Mr. James Jackson's going to play a little
I'll give you a little job. Wait, you were saying what you work at?
I used to work at Koch Galleries in downtown Mobile.
Where else?
Just the volunteer work at the church downtown.
What's your background? I mean, maybe you was in Costco. You don't go
Where?
to Costco.
Where?
Costco.
No. Maybe I just looked like somebody.
No, you.
I've been living in Mobile my whole life, so
Me too, so that's my business.
we're probably going to what about where you live?
Okay. You know,
Well, this is my daughter, so you
she told me that day it was coming to you. I've never seen her. Yeah, you
some
were before.
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Maybe just call her. Maybe at Walmart, Sam's, something. I said, well, you doing something, I was doing
You look
something.
familiar also.
Yeah, I be here with him, I be here with everybody else too. I'm always doing something. Yeah. I know you're gonna do that thing on Sunday. I mean, I just told you, but on the 20th. You know, I know that like that guy.
Why don't do you want to?
I know that guy's gonna do. But what you gonna do on the 16th?
Oh, I have a little art for sale over there. Records and CDs.
Yeah, this is
And then turn it off to you. It's the R.L. Burns stuff. See my jumper, Lord, hanging on the line. See my jumper, Lord, hanging on the line. Know by now, got a little bit of something here on my mind. Fix my supper, Lord, let me go to bed. Fix my supper, Lord, let me go to bed. So white lightning just been running round all through my head. Wouldn't be here, Lord, now, honey, if it hadn't been for you. Wouldn't be here, Lord, now, honey, if it had not been for you. Way down here, the way that you want for me to do. All right. R.L. Burnside shot a man once, and a friend of mine asked him about it, and they said, "R.L., did you kill that man?" He said, "I pulled the trigger. It was up to God whether or not the bullet hit him." So I'll leave y'all with that.